Qatar says negotiations to free some hostages seized by Hamas are in their final stage. Israeli government and Hamas reportedly set to hold their fire in exchange for their release. But still, no confirmation from Tel Aviv as strikes continue to pound the Gaza Strip.
And for more on this possible truce, we're joined by John Lyndon, Executive Director, Alliance for Middle East Peace. Mr. Lyndon, we just heard that Qatar is fairly certain this will go through, but a note of caution on the weekend from the White House in which we heard them say nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. What in everything could kill this deal before it's even signed?
Well, there's an awful lot of variables. There's the content of the deal itself. I mean, it's reputed to involve a pause perhaps of 5 days, as well as a suspension of aerial surveillance over the southern Gaza Strip, because Hamas, I think, are saying they're not aware where all of the hostages are and would need to have some assurance that they would have freedom to operate in order to identify where the hostages are being kept. And then there's also a discussion around Palestinian prisoner exchange. Potentially a few hundred women and children who will be included as part of a deal. So each one of those variables carries an awful lot of complexity within it. And then, of course, there's the kinetic events on the ground. At any moment, something could happen on the ground in Gaza or at the northern border, or indeed in Israel proper, which would reduce the space for a deal to be done. We've had two very, very close moments where a deal seemed to be within reach. And then for various reasons, there was a regression afterwards. So I think the White House is right to say that nothing is agreed until everything's agreed.
Mr. Lyndon, is there any combination of variables that you mentioned that could allow both sides to sign onto this in such a way that if they did not sign, they would lose out more than if they did sign?
Yes, I absolutely believe so. I mean, there is very strong support inside Israel for the hostages to be released. The families of hostages, some of whom we're working with at OMEP, because activists and members of ours are amongst those being held hostage in Gaza. They've been mounting a campaign domestically within Israel. They had meetings with the Security Cabinet this week and internationally as well at the United Nations to draw attention to the plight of hostages. And I think creating a real groundswell of support of the need to do whatever is necessary to bring home hostages who, at the end of the day, were let down by Israel when they were taken captive. Simultaneously, on the Palestinian side, though it is harder to measure this, there is real terror and exhaustion and deep, deep human trauma in Gaza. And now that we're into 6 weeks of the most devastating airstrikes and a ground invasion in the Gaza Strip. So the sense amongst Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but more broadly, of the opportunity of having a pause of 5 days and getting the Gaza Strip flooded with humanitarian goods, it would be transformative and something that people are really calling out for, as well as the ability, hopefully, to re-equip hospitals and get some of the most vulnerable Palestinians from Gaza out to field hospitals and being assured of their return again to the Gaza Strip. All of those things are contingent on a deal like this being done, and hopefully the pressure from the international community can also help to make sure that no spoilers or unprecedented events stop it from taking place.
But listen, as you mentioned, Israel, now this is a war, the exhaustion that Hamas is feeling, Israel might feel this is exactly the point in which they need to press on ahead and not give any breathing space for Hamas fighters. It may face domestic pressure at home to bring home these hostages, but it's also fighting a war.
It's true, and there is a tension, and the polling shows it within Israel itself. Look, I think you also heard Gadi Eisenkot reportedly, a member of the Security Cabinet, said that actually bringing home the hostages is the top priority, which was new language that we hadn't heard before. And I think there is a tension or a debate internally within Israel. But I think it's important to note just how much of an opportunity a pause and a hostage release like this might be. It will be the first significant positive development in 6 weeks of intense tragedy. It would also be a moment, perhaps, for diplomatic ideas to enter the fray, not just around the immediate humanitarian crisis, but also more long-term ideas that could be fleshed out in the relative calm that would come about. And it may, to answer your question very directly, give Israel a chance to actually think much more carefully through what its long-term aims are, because I know from speaking to many partner governments around the world, there is ambiguity as to what Israel's long-term strategy is, either about its nature or whether it's been communicated with many international partners. Now, all of that will become easier to achieve in the pause and hostage release that we're talking about, and fundamentally getting to see these people, particularly the children, being reunited with their families. It will be the first time on my screen, really in any significant way, I've seen something that would bring a smile to my face since the events of October 7th. All
right, so our final question here, Mr. Lyndon. Do you think this window, should this truce happen, would give Israel the chance to think about, as you mentioned, its long-term strategy, what happens the day after the war ends?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, Israel's war aims are Israel's war aims, but there is no military solution to the dispute between Israelis and Palestinians. This will require diplomatic and political progress, and it will require intense international engagement. Now, I'm aware of conversations taking place in capitals around the world around that, whether it's Gaza governance questions or restarting a real diplomatic process that can end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. All of those things will become more central and more viable, and people would have the time and the space to explore them fully in the 5-day pause that's being rumored around this hostage release. And I think we need to be spending more and more of our time thinking about that day after. Gaza has been devastated. Northern Gaza and the Gaza city itself, it's estimated that around half of the housing stock has been destroyed or damaged. And the deep, deep trauma that both Palestinians and Israelis have witnessed and experienced, a huge loss of life. We need to really find a way internationally to build a diplomatic strategy that addresses the final status issues, but also deals with those human beings and begins to figure out a way where partnerships can be built, even trust, dare I say it, restored, and that we can have a bottom-up process that also allows Israelis and Palestinians over time to see themselves as partners again. And that's a conversation that can perhaps commence in any hostage exchange and ceasefire that is perhaps in the offing right now.
Thanks for joining us, John Lyndon, Executive Director, Alliance for Middle East Peace.